Everybody masked?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Everybody ready to go?
Yes, sir.
You live on. Yes. Another tragic situation just a week ago that our officers were involved in a shooting incident of an armed suspect. Today was no different. At 17:15, officers were eastbound on Grand River going to an unrelated call for service. As they approached the intersection at Grand River and, what's that, Meyer? Yeah, at Grand River and Meyer, as they were approaching the intersection, they saw an individual in the middle of the intersection with what appeared to be about a 32-inch sword. He was swinging it very wildly. They got out of their vehicle. As soon as our officers exited their marked police vehicle, the suspect began to run in their direction, swinging the sword. They asked him several times to drop the weapon. He refused. Instead, he continued to advance. At one point, one officer deployed his taser. The taser did not take effect. One of the things that we've learned from both a witness and a preliminary investigation, and I want to also make a disclaimer at this point, this is not even an hour old. So there's some things about this investigation that we're still learning, but it appeared that this suspect, not only was he armed with a very long sword, he was also wearing some type of protective covering over his torso. I wouldn't call it a bulletproof vest. Some describe it as something that hockey players wear. His forearms were covered. So as the officers deployed the taser, it did not take effect. At some point, not certain at this point, before or after, the suspect took out a second sharp object, which turned out to be about an 8-inch dagger, threw it in the direction of the officer, striking the officer below the lower right eye. The officer sustained what appears to be a half-inch laceration. He was transported and he's being treated at a local hospital. This thing continued, this interaction. The officers continually said, drop the weapon. At some point, the partner officer deployed one round from his service revolver, striking the suspect. Suspect continued. At some point, he entered into as he was chasing the officers, he entered into the driver's side car, still armed with a very long sword. Again, he threw the dagger, and it appeared he had even beyond that a third knife. We have pictures of those weapons, so we'll make sure we provide those to you. A good Samaritan, a citizen, seeing what was going on, as he saw the suspect inside the driver's side of the vehicle, he took his personal vehicle and he used it to block this suspect in so that he couldn't get out and get to the officers. Not sure what happened next, but by this time he had already sustained one gunshot wound. He has since been transported and he succumbed to his injuries. So he's deceased. We believe he's a late 20-something-year-old suspect, not certain about his mental condition, except his behavior prior to the officer's arrival. Again, there was not a call for service here. They just happened to be going to a separate call, and that's when they saw him in the roadway. But I give a lot of credit to both the officers for showing extreme patience, hoping that the taser would have effect. It did not. I'm told preliminarily that the second officer attempted to deploy his taser, and again, the one officer had already been struck, and then it was a good Samaritan who intervened in an effort to try to assist the officers. But by that time, it was too late. So that's where we are right now. Again, this happened at about 7:15 or 7:18 in the evening. So we still have a lot of investigative work to go, but we do have pictures of the weapons that this suspect possessed. So I'll take any questions you might have.
You said he jumped in the vehicle. Was that the scout car? Or?
He jumped in the scout car. The concern that the Good Samaritan had, knowing that police officers have shotguns and rifles in the cabinet or the front passenger and driver section of the car. He believed when he blocked this suspect in that he may have been attempting to gain control of their weapon systems in the front of the vehicle. That did not happen, but that was what was in this witness's mind. I had a direct conversation with him, so I wanted to be able to tell you what he articulated to me. He was very concerned, particularly when he saw the actions, but he did stress the officers were very patient. At some point throughout this ordeal, this suspect was literally chasing the officers with the sword. And I don't know at what point, that's a part of this investigation, I don't know. I just know that at the point, the officer fearing for his life, given that an officer had already been injured, and the suspect did not release his sword, one single shot was fired that turned out to be fatal.
Chief, how much does this department value citizens who see something happening and try and do the right thing?
Well, I got to tell you, I certainly commended that citizen for his involvement. He knew it was a very risky situation, but he saw that our officers was in danger. He wanted to assist. By this time, the officers called for assistance. Additional units started to arrive, but again, it was too late. This was not a call that they were responding to, but it was certainly something that they ran into in this intersection. Imagine an individual wildly swinging a sword and then pulling a dagger. I believe, based on what I know about this case, but again, it's very early, that the 8-inch dagger was removed from his back, tucked into his pants, and thrown at the officer, who was then struck again in just below his right eye.
Any witness?
So he's very fortunate. I did indicate already that there was a witness. I had a conversation with that witness.
No, I was going to ask, did witnesses describe that he was going after anybody before the officers arrived at all? Or?
Didn't say that. The one thing that this witness I had a direct conversation with, he articulated that the suspect at one point was chasing the officers, and they were backing up, and they kept saying, "Drop your weapon, drop your weapon." And he wasn't complying. So unknown what his intent was by getting in the car. This Good Samaritan certainly wanted to stop what he was doing, and he literally pinned him in the car with his personal vehicle so that he couldn't get out and do any more or cause any more harm.
Chief, you said your officers were heading to a different call and they just happened to see what was going on here. They stopped and immediately took action. If your officers weren't coming by here, I mean, what could have been the outcome? What could have been the consequence?
Anything could have happened. Not certain. I don't know how long he was in the middle of this intersection before our officers arrived. The Good Samaritan is in the area. He just saw how quickly this thing was unfolding, and he responded with total disregard for his own personal safety, but he certainly wanted to help the officers and stop this threat, and it was a threat. This is something I've been talking about, the fact that it seems this is the 4th officer-involved shooting now in a span of 2.5 weeks. Clearly, our officers are facing very aggressive suspects who are armed. And in this case, this suspect didn't have he had 3 knives. One was a sword, very long sword, but we're going to make sure you have those photographs so that your viewers and listeners can see what we're describing.
Chief, are these young officers or are these veteran officers?
I'm not sure their tenure. They're both, the one has been transported to a hospital, and another one is being interviewed at this point. Most of our workforce is young. Whether it's tenured or not is not the issue. The officers were attacked.
But you spoke to patients, and I wonder if that's an older officer who's been around or if that's a younger one who just is very aware of.
Well, the young officers, that's something that's ingrained during training. The other thing I will add is happens in all of these situations, and this is something that I've not seen in other departments where I've led, but the fact that after there's a shooting incident, the officers immediately went into a life-saving mode, they began to rip off this protective covering, whatever it was, I'm not certain. Some describe it as something that what hockey players would wear, removing that vest so that they could administer some kind of aid. But unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries after he got transported to the hospital.
Chief, why do you think it is 4 shootings in the past 2 weeks? Officers are coming into contact with very dangerous individuals. Before you mentioned something about COVID-19, people being locked up. I mean, why do you think this is happening so often?
Well,
so
you know, it's a combination of things. I wish I had a good answer for you. The one thing I know for certain, we have individuals in our neighborhoods who are violent. I'm not going to say definitively if it's from early release. That may be a part of it. It could be any number of reasons, but it could be the anti-police rhetoric that's permeating our country. The fact that there's bail reform and some individuals being released, and frankly, suspects feel emboldened. Now, I don't know what the case is with this individual. Certainly, when his behavior was described, you know, swinging knives wildly in the middle of an intersection, it makes me wonder if this was an individual suffering from some form of mental illness. I can't say that. I don't know. I don't know anything about this person. It's tragic. But certainly our officers were faced with a threat, an imminent threat, and they responded. A single shot was fired.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for
So
your time.
we'll
Yeah,
make
thank you,
that available to you. You got that? Yes, sir. Okay. You can shut that down. We're good.